Again, ladies and gentlemen, about to begin the funeral service. We ask for those that are here, if you have a cell phone or pager, if you could turn it to the silent mode. Officiating today is a longtime friend of the family and of Mark, Rabbi Shlomo Tenenbaum.
Okay, we'll start with a blessing that we say when we come to the cemetery. So I'll read it in Hebrew and then translate it in English. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher yotzar eschem edin v'zon v'chilkel eschem edin v'hemis eschem edin v'yodea mispar chulchem edin v'osa d'hachiyoschem l'kaim eschem edin Baruch atah Adonai mechayei hamesim. Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who gives us life with purpose, nourishes and sustains us with a purpose, and when it's time for us to leave this world, there's also a purpose. God knows the sum total of how long we are here, what our job is, and God will restore and resuscitate us also with a purpose. Blessed is God who resuscitates the dead. It's a Jewish belief that although the body is temporary, the soul is eternal. And so right now, we're saying goodbye to Mark's body, but his soul continues and will be it's in heaven or in our hearts simultaneously. Mizmor LeDavid Adonai Roi Lo Achsar Benos Deshi Arbitzeni Al Mei Menuchas Yina Aleini Nafshi Yashovev Yancheni B'Maglei Tzedek L'Man Shemo Gam Ki Eilach V'Geit Salmavas Lo Ira Ra Ki Ato Yimadi Shivtecha Mishantecha Heini Yenachamoni Taruch L'Fonei Shulchan Neged Tzorarai Dishanta B'Shem Roshi Kosi Revaya Ach Tov V'Chesed Yerzufoni Kol Yimei Chayev V'Shavti B'Es Adonai L'Orach Yomim. Psalm of David, God is my shepherd, I shall not lack. In lush meadows he lays me down. Beside tranquil waters he leads me. He restores my soul. He leads me on the paths of justice for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley overshadowed by death, I fear no evil, because God is with me. Your rod and staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. We're here today to escort our dear friend Mark to his final reward, and we have a few people that are going to speak. Maybe I'll have Naama, and then Lisa, and then yourself, and then. Okay, so I'm going to first call on a wonderful, wonderful friend and support, Dr. Naama Wasserman.
Okay, and I'm going to call Bob. Bob, we're going to start with a poem that you're going to read, one of Mark's poems.
Over here?
Bob
Can I do it from here?
right over here. Bob is a longtime participant in the poetry workshop that Mark put together and led for years. I don't know how many years. 4 years probably, maybe more.
Yeah.
So a poem by Mark.
All right. For Avery on her leaving. Because we are rivers, we see what rivers see. The branches of the alder trees along the banks bristling with red-winged blackbirds, the sunlight breaking across the water. The white boats tugging at old pine docks. Because we are rivers, we go on like this forever, turning only to wave our goodbyes. Rivers are famous for waving goodbye.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, this is a bit long. Please bear with me. So we're here to say goodbye to our beloved Mark. And I wanted to just say a few words about my relationship with him. So I first met Mark at the turn of the 21st century, 2001 or 2. He was living at this shelter down the street, and as he told many times later when recounting his history, Ari, another resident, told me to go to the Ark and ask for Shlomo and Naama. They will take care of you. And so he did. And that was the beginning of a long and illustrious friendship, one that spanned many turns, challenges, breakthroughs, setbacks, and accomplishments. But on that first encounter, Mark had the demeanor of someone who crashed in from the cold, a refugee of a treacherous route that involved homelessness, mental health challenges, and a bout of meningitis that, he said, had almost killed him. He told me of dialing his friend Bobby collect from a truck stop around Atlanta where he was living in his car. He asked for help getting back home. He felt that unless he made it back to Chicago, he was going to die. Bobby wired him some money and thus started his way back home through 20 years that involved reclaiming back his health, sense of belonging, friendships, and most of all, meaning in life, which for him was always his writing. We could sense right away that he had been graced with a keen intelligence, wry sense of humor, and an eye of a poet, able to see things in a way that was entirely fresh and original. While initially troubled by symptoms of paranoia, this clarity of vision, I'm going to take those off, had never left him. Also unique to him was his composure, made of equal parts decency and kindness to all around him. His struggles were always internal, very rarely spilled out into his relationships with others. You could tell he was made up of good materials, brought up with love and respect, and was able to give that back to his surroundings. He told us of a happy childhood growing up in Skokie in the 1960s with picture-perfect holidays, their beloved Nana who lived with them, the maternal grandmother who hailed from Donegal County in Ireland. Yes. A comfortable home. He says the house still has the number that he made in shop on it. His mother's perfect brisket and long hours at Devonshire Park with his friends. He shared stories of a wild youth filled with hitchhiking to concerts, skinny dipping at night at the Botanical Gardens, and wild times in Niles North.
I wasn't there.
Were you? Anyway, back at the Ark, we found a room for him, or maybe it was first a couch in a living room in an apartment of another client, and floated him there for a while as he was trying to find a job. His first and possibly last full-time job was as a chauffeur of a funeral home, complete with a suit and probably a driving cap. Soon the trouble began to pile up in the familiar way they do for those who stumble or get swept to the margins. Parking tickets, bad credit preventing a bank account, getting booted and towed, loss of ID and inaccessible records, lack of health insurance. It took us about a year to dig out from under all of that, but eventually he agreed to apply for government assistance and treatment. At one point, I struck a Faustian deal with him. Free rent for cooperation with applying for government assistance and accepting medications. Just for a little while until you are stabilized. And he agreed. In the coming years, there were several more crazy roommate situations, but all in all, he began to reclaim a life for himself. He found a very part-time job at Selected Works, an iconic Lakeview bookstore he had frequented as a customer. The job enabled him to be around books and the beloved live-in cat, Hodge. And he told me of many interesting encounters with patrons of all stripes who visited this community institution and often became his friends. Literature has always been his passion. He told us that he began to write in high school and later loved the literature classes at UCLA he took during his years in California. As things settled down, he found his literary voice again. His first piece was an absurdist play entitled Toy Boat, a tongue twister he liked, set at the Ark with his roommate Joseph Fishman in a supportive role. The following years, he wrote poems. often working on a single poem until it felt just right, bringing me a new version to review daily. With the help and encouragement of Keith Peterson, the owner of Selected Works, who's here today, hello, he self-published a slim volume of excellent poetry. He told me he would wake up every day at 5 a.m., brew himself some strong coffee, and smoke a bunch of cigarettes, and then write. Like in those hours when the world is still asleep. He wrote in modern American poetry style, favoring plain language, strong images, and the principle he often quoted, show, don't tell. His images were taken from the world around him, the humble north branch of the Chicago River, early morning chirping of birds, the glimmer of Lake Michigan, a rose in the neighbor's backyard, a profile of someone he saw on the bus. I kept bugging him to send his work to Literary Journal, which he tried once or twice before giving up. Just before the pandemic, he applied and got accepted to a very prestigious summer program for poets called Bread Loaf. Because of COVID, this program ended up being remote, which was disappointing, but his talent was recognized and features there. Coming to the Ark was a part of his daily routine. He was with us from the inception of the program that we put together for people who needed financial and other kind of assistance. A frequent participant in our activities and classes. The program was housed in the basement of the building, and Mark had a regular seat at the bottom of the stairs. Where others had often collected around him, we called it the porch. It was easy to imagine him sitting there looking out ahead at a real vista rather than the dingy stairs, spending his days in quiet conversation and contemplation. The other thing that brought immense pleasure to him was rekindling his old friendships from high school. Using an old Apple computer he had scored in many of his hours thrifting, he enthusiastically plugged into Facebook, quickly reaching scores of old friends whom he had lost touch with over the years of drifting. To those of you who sustained these friendships, please know they were incredibly valuable to him. He was so proud of the invitation to visit friends in Minneapolis, go up to Gurnee to hang out with his high school buddies, and spend weekends in Buffalo Grove and Skokie. We strategized how he would take the metro to a reunion in the burbs, and he was so gratified to meet everyone, sharing impression and commenting, the women still look great, the guys, not so much. He was never concerned about being judged for the life he had, which I think was one of his best talents, accepting himself and others mostly for who they are. After a while, I suggested he tries to teach a poetry class at the Ark. In this workshop, participants read heavy-duty poetry, the stuff of anthologies and college-level English courses, discussed, interpreted, and related to their meaning, and then tried their hands at writing themselves. He said he didn't want to teach it dumbed down. The poems were featured in our newsletter and at Mark's initiative also published in an in-house collection. He edited these poems with almost the same meticulous attention he edited his own poems, paying attention to line length, rhythm, and cadence, until he got it just right. He liked to quote someone who said that writing is like freeing the sculpture, freeing it from the marble around it. There is an idea worth showing in there, and you just have to take away all the extra stuff around it. Mark often shared his pride in his family members. He spoke lovingly of his brother who excelled in horsemanship and died too young of AIDS. He bragged about his nieces in Atlanta and Seattle and shared memory of his sister Sherry as the most beautiful girl in high school. He had nothing but loving memories of his parents. Mark and Sherry kind of fell out of contact when he left Atlanta, but he reached out to her 3 years later, and they stayed in touch since then. He always waited, in fact, budgeted for her yearly birthday present, and when invited to her landmark birthday, got on the Greyhound bus. He was afraid to fly for fear of some pending traffic tickets, and made the odyssey back to Atlanta. This was a memorable trip where he got to reconnect with his nieces and grandnephews, and as Sherry recalls, made a fine impression on everyone. Sherry, I want you to know, and I want to thank you for the unbelievable way you showed up to take care of Mark throughout this awful illness. And I want you to know how important that was for him. You were with him during the most difficult moments, coordinated all the care, filled the freezer with home-cooked meals, and made his apartment livable and inviting. I think he traced the beginning of his journey back home and all the better years that followed to one vivid moment in the parking lot of a hospital in Atlanta. The story goes, he often told this story to all of us, was of being overcome by grief at the loss of his mother just then, when a big yellow butterfly came fluttering by. A butterfly, he said, of the sort never seen around there, which lingered for a moment and then fluttered away. A visitation of sorts, or perhaps a signal of hope. The rest of the way back was due to his determination to get back on his feet and to reclaim his life, but may have not been possible without a whole community of friends and people who cared about him, who recognized his goodness, affirmed his unique contributions, and welcomed him home. The Talmud says, anyone who saves one life saves the whole world. In Mark, there was a whole world to be saved, and the world in turn was better for him being in it. May his memory be a blessing.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Lisa, dear friend, is going to share some poetry. Mark.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay? Oh, now it's working.
That's right, it's overheated, so we'll see what happens.
Okay. I have two poems I want to read. A poem by Mark, but first a poem that I shared with Sherry and Danny, who liked it very much. It's called Obit Grief. Grief, as I know it, died many times. It died trying to reunite with other lesser deaths. Each morning I laid out my children's clothing to cover the grief. The grief remains, but is changed by what it is covered with. A picture of oblivion is not the same as oblivion. My grief is not the same as my pain. My mother was a mathematician, so I tried to calculate my grief. My father was an engineer, so I tried to build a box around my grief, along with a small wooden bed that grief could lie down on. The texts kept interrupting my grief, forcing me to speak about nothing. If you cut out a rectangle of a perfectly blue sky, no clouds, no wind, no birds, frame it with a blue frame, place it face up on the floor of an empty museum with an open atrium to the sky, that is grief. This poem by Mark is called Spiritus Mundi, which means spirit of the world, tenor of the times, or mysticism. Spiritus Mundi. Live like a ghost in the home you inhabit. Leave windows open, leave doors ajar. Be the breeze that lifts the curtain. Rattle your keychain at the ear of the dog. The tinkling in the other room and the nighttime creak of settling wood is all you're doing. Light will pass through like onion skin as you cast no shadow across the kitchen floor. Others will wonder and investigate the mysteries, but don't explain anything. You have become wonder itself. You, of all people, are not afraid to wander like a rabbi in his dark synagogue. I've been fortunate to share poems almost every day with Mark since we connected in 2012. He was my poetry friend and poetry teacher, and I will miss him and miss that a lot.
Sure.
I just have a few words, but not much. I don't have anything prepared. I just wanted to share with you how grateful I am for two things for Mark. Number one, whether he found the ark or the ark found him, it literally saved his life. The last over 20 years, it has been such a blessing that he has made so many friends and what I call family. All of the ARC members are family to Mark. They always have been. The other thing I'm really grateful for is the computer. As Nama alluded to, when Mark found a computer, he was able to reconnect with all his high school friends, in which he shared so many of his, wonderful times growing up. I've heard a few bad stories too, and a few bad influences here, but overall, I didn't know about any of those. I was older and I was doing my own thing in high school. But I'm really grateful that he was able to make his family with the ARC and with his high school friends. And, I will think of you always, lovingly, because Mark loved you all. Okay. And Keith, of course. And that's where Mark was happiest too, when he was in your bookstore and reading books, collecting books, writing poems, whatever he was doing, and playing with Hodge. But thank you so much for coming out today. I really appreciate it. And thank you for teaching me more about Mark.
Oh, yeah. Today is not the first time I was in this cemetery with Mark. About a little over 4 years ago, my mother passed away, and she was buried in the front area of this funeral cemetery. And Mark came over to me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, I was very moved by your eulogy. And I give a lot of eulogies, and it's interesting that I think about that moment every time I give a eulogy. And that, first of all, that act of kindness from Mark. Second of all, when you give a eulogy, it's one thing when you have some distance and you can be clever. On the other hand, when it's your mother, you're not too clever. You're very emotional, and so it meant a lot to me that he said a kind word to me. And third of all, eulogy is from the word elegy, which is a poem, and his stamp of approval on that eulogy meant a lot to me. Today is a similar day that I always felt very close with Mark, and it's so I'm not going to be too clever today. A lot of feelings, and it's the loss for everybody in the ARC family. I saw Mark almost every day of the week for 20 plus years, till somewhat recently when he got sicker. He spent every holiday with him. We'd have some Jewish holiday program, and he'd always be there. so I was just kind of revisiting the file of memories, and my first memory of interacting with Mark was when he was in the ARC residence, and to my recollection, the residence had just opened, and they were working out a lot of kinks, and it's a pretty nice place overall, but it was not an easy place to be in when they first opened. They had like 1,000 rules, and he wasn't really a rules guy at that point. And I remember having a conversation with him on the back steps of was I guess his first foray into taking over steps. He had a conversation with the back steps of the residence, and I said, dude, you got to follow these rules here. He said, the rules are crazy. I said, I agree with you, they're crazy. But I said, you don't want the first thing on your resume that you got kicked out of a shelter. So he reminded me of that conversation many times. And it's interesting, we not had that little conversation that kind of did get him to shore himself in. And, he might have gotten kicked out, and who knows if we ever would have seen him again. Another thing I remember from that time was, this fellow there was a fellow there who in fact, did have on his resume, he was the first guy kicked out of the residence, and that guy was incorrigible, impossible, the most difficult human I ever met. He became a sort of a mensch later in life, but at the time, that guy was just incorrigible. And I remember that guy pulling me over one day. He said, even though they kicked me out, he says, you got to look out for this guy, Mark. He says, he's a good guy. And it was interesting that I saw some good in this other fellow that I had heretofore not seen. And I think Mark brought that out in people. He was good to others, but he also brought a certain goodness out in people who might have been, kept to themselves, been sort of, I don't know if selfish is the right word, but certainly self-interested. Mark brought out this engagement where everybody he interacted with had some kind of a deep engagement, including myself. I interacted with 1 trillion people, through the ARC and other venues, and I think just how deep that connection was, and and I think that all of us had that unique, deep connection. He had just this depth of connection and engagement with people around him. He found common ground to connect with everyone. Which is another interesting thing. There were sports guys that could talk to him about sports. There were guys into beer. I don't think he was a beer drinker, but he could talk to you about the beer brands. With me, it was Judaica stuff. But he could relate to and talk, just connect deeply with everybody about anything. Just the other day, I was cleaning something up in my house, and I came across a book on Jewish history that he had recommended. And whenever he came to me and said, Shlomo, I want to recommend the book, I always bought it because his recommendations were good. He was on his game when it came to literature. And it was another thing I just think about a lot was that this, poetry, and I know there are people that are great fans of poetry. And I was not a fan of poetry in my life over the course of the years. And it's just, maybe an unfair stereotype, but my vision of poetry was Percy Dove Tonsils, Ernie Kovac's kind of a caricature of the stuffy professor. Mark he was the best ambassador I ever met for poetry, because he wasn't stuffy. He was one of us. He was a regular guy. But he brought out all that beauty and wisdom in poetry that I never would have even known existed had I not connected with Mark. On the day of his passing, 3 people separately called me to tell me about times that they had some financial issues, and Mark was there to help them, and including one fellow who told me that I had given him some money for something, and he said, you know, I hit some hard time, and Mark shows up with an envelope full of money, and then in the envelope I see a note from you that you had given it to Mark. Now, you know, another chapter, besides working in the bookstore, was in the Ark thrift shop. They decided, you know, it was a thrift shop, and they typically have a trillion, books laying around in piles. And they came up I don't remember whose idea it was.
Miriam's.
But, oh, it's Miriam. They came up with this idea they should have like a store inside a store. So Mark was an employee by you, but he was the manager of the Ark thrift shop bookstore. And sure enough, he took this like it just, we've all been to thrift shops, and we know, this junky C- novels stacked on top of each other, and he turned it into like a A+ classy bookstore. And then he hired clients of ours, many of whom had never worked in their life, who really had fairly serious disabilities, and everybody walked out of there. I was feeling enriched and valued, and what he did for people, it wasn't so much about the books as what he did for the people that were there, and it was an amazing thing. And it, I think, got a very good reputation. There was a period of time where, book lovers heard about it, and they were coming there, and they'd come in for a Raymond Chandler novel and leave with a couch. So brought their bottom line up significantly. It can't be said enough what Nama, Shimon, and the IDP, and everybody in the program did for Mark. But and I just want to end with that he did all of us in social service are kind of dedicated to trying to be helpful to people, and Mark gave us back something we don't always get, which is a tremendous amount of nachas. He was a success, and he could have ended up, walking out that day because of our shelter rules or something. We would have found him on the street. Who knows what might have happened? He ended up running groups in the Ark and ended up, employed and enriching the lives of others. Tomorrow we're going to read the Parsha of Pinchas in the Torah, and the Parsha tells, we have a tradition that Pinchas, the protagonist of the story, is also morphed into Elijah the prophet. And Elijah the prophet has this unique quality that Elijah the prophet is like the guardian angel that resides in heaven sometimes, and then sometimes he's there to push you out of the way of a speeding truck, and he comes in and out of heaven at will. And I feel like that about Mark. As we're sending Mark off to a better place, he's still gonna be with us in all kinds of special ways, and he was really a guardian angel for all of us. So, Mark, thank you for being part of our lives.
Amen.
We'll say the messenger's prayer. There's a blessing. You say it together with me. So give it a little rip. Yeah, say it together. Yeah, it's not on the page, okay. So just say it with me. Atah, Adonai, Eloheinu, Melech, Ha'olam, Dayan, Ha'emet. And give that a little rip. Try it from the bottom. Should That's why Simcha always has a knife on him. The knife. Oh, you have a knife?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
What do you need?
Just a knife.
It's not terrible.
Huh? Made out of-
He's done that before.
Yes. Thank you.
Mark coincidentally was very good whenever any of our guys passed. He was always very good about that. Coming for funerals, this one from India. We'll cover the, and they're gonna put the cement cover on that side.
Okay.
It's not every state does it. Illinois, that's an Illinois thing because it floats a lot here. And then we'll, put some earth on top, and then we'll say the final prayer of the Kaddish. And then maybe if people, if anybody wants to share any memories or anything, I didn't want to keep. I know the van may have to go back soon, so I didn't want to keep anything out too long.
Do we shovel or shovel?
Yeah, we'll do that in a minute. After they put the cover.
Yeah. Once they put that cement thing. Oh, Simcha, do you have the earth from Israel?
Yeah, it's already in there, but I'll give you another one.
Okay.
Another one?
Yeah. They have like a little bag of earth from Israel. So. I know there was some water back here.
There is water right here.
Yeah, stay hydrated. Yeah.
Everybody needs water. There's some water here. Okay. Water.